You know, every CEO feels it, that constant, nagging pressure to deliver short-term results. But what if that entire pressure cooker is built on a fundamental misunderstanding? Well, today, we're going to dig into the insights of Keohane Williamson to show how leaders can stop reacting to all that market noise and actually start playing the long game.
We hear it all the time, right? The market wants this, the market demands that. But let's stop and ask a really basic question. Who is the market? Is it some single, all-powerful being with one clear voice? As you're about to find out, the answer is way more complicated. And honestly, understanding that is the very first step to breaking free.
So, at the very heart of this whole problem is this fundamental disconnect between business and finance.
Think about it like this. A CEO, she's playing chess, right? Planning her moves years in advance. But a huge chunk of the market is playing a high-speed video game, totally focused on the next few seconds. As Williamson points out, they're working with completely different timeframes, different incentives, and they're not even speaking the same language. And that's exactly how leaders get trapped in this reactive cycle that can just destroy long-term value.
Okay, so to really navigate this landscape, we've got to bust a couple of really powerful myths. And the biggest one, it's about the very people a CEO is supposed to serve, the shareholders.
So here it is, the core misconception, that everyone who owns a piece of your company is on your team, rowing in the same direction. But as Williamson makes crystal clear, some of your so-called teammates might have wildly different goals. Lumping all shareholders together into one big happy family, that's the first critical mistake.
All right, let's actually break down who these people are. First, you've got your retail shareholders, individual investors, maybe like you and me. They're generally on your team, they want the stock to go up. Simple enough. But then you have index managers. Here's where it gets tricky. They own your stock, but they also own all your competitors' stock. They're not betting on you specifically, they're betting on the whole sector. And then you have the active managers, and this is even more complex. See, if they're overweight your stock, it means they're holding more of it than the index is. That's a good sign, a bet on your success. But if they're underweight, they're holding less of it, which is basically a bet that you're going to fail compared to your peers. So the big takeaway here, the market is not one big unified team, not even close.
Now for the next myth, and it's one that, thankfully, a lot of companies are starting to figure out. It's this idea that giving quarterly earnings guidance is actually a good thing.
So the thinking goes that if you give guidance, you reduce volatility because you're preventing surprises. Makes sense on the surface. But the reality, and this is backed by Williamson's research, is the complete opposite. It turns out that providing quarterly guidance actually increases volatility. It creates this high-stakes, high-pressure game where missing your number by a single penny can cause a massive, crazy overreaction from the market.
And look, this isn't just some academic theory. Companies are voting with their feet. In just the last decade, the number of U.S. companies that issue quarterly guidance has plummeted from over a third to now less than a quarter. They're waking up to the fact that it's a trap.
And here's why it's such a trap. Williamson calls it a nonsensical loop. It goes like this. First, the company drops some subtle hints to the analysts about what its earnings are going to be. Then, the analysts take those hints and create a consensus forecast, which is really just the company's own hints reflected back at them. And suddenly, the company is under this incredible pressure to hit a number that it basically created itself. And this can lead to some really bad, short-sighted decisions, like slashing R&D budgets just to avoid missing that artificial target. It's a completely self-inflicted wound.
So, okay, we've busted the myths. Let's talk about the solution. How can a CEO actually pull this off and play the long game? Well, it starts with a totally new way of thinking about investor relations, a playbook for actively going out and getting the right kind of shareholders.
The very first step is something Williamson calls an investor strategy. You know, every successful company has a customer strategy, right? They know exactly who their customer is and how to reach them. Well, the same logic should apply to your investors. You need to proactively decide which long-term partners you want to attract and then focus all your energy on them. And this also means knowing who not to focus on. Williamson's analogy here for sell-side analysts is just perfect. She calls them weather forecasters. Think about it. Their job is to take the data and predict what might happen, but they don't own your company. A CEO's legal fiduciary duty is to their shareholders, the actual owners, not to the people who are just forecasting the weather.
So let's boil it down. Here's your playbook. First, develop that proactive investor strategy to get the right partners on board. Then, you control the narrative with a clear multi-year roadmap that you talk about constantly. You have to engage directly with the portfolio managers. They're the real decision makers. And finally, you stop playing the short-term game by ditching that quarterly guidance. That's how you tune out all the noise.
But this brings us to the final, And I'd argue the most critical insight of all. After all this talk about the market and investors and strategies, the real key to long-term success isn't out there. It's in here. It's internal.
Williamson just nails it with this quote. What matters is not the stock price or its volatility, it's how management reacts to it. Let that sink in for a second. The stock is always going to go up and down. That's a given. The real test of a leader is how they respond when it does.
And here's where the real danger lies. A stock drops because of some market noise, maybe a trade that has absolutely nothing to do with how your company is actually performing, and management panics. They react as if it's a real signal. They start cutting R&D, or they slash the marketing budget. And that inflicts real, tangible, long-term damage on the company, all because of some irrelevant chatter. The whole game is about separating the signal from the noise.
So the next time you hear someone say that the market is speaking, the real question you have to ask is this: who are you actually listening to? Is it a long-term partner who's invested in your vision, or a short-term trader just looking for a quick buck? Is it a true owner, or just a weather forecaster? The answer to that question will define the future of your company.